Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to explain yourself to people who have already decided who you are? You say one thing and they twist it. You set a boundary and they call you cold. You step back to protect your peace, and suddenly you become the villain in a story you never agreed to join. So you start explaining. You write long messages, revisit every detail, and try to prove your intentions, defend your character, and correct their version of the truth. But the more you explain, the weaker you feel. Deep down, you realize something important. You are not just trying to be understood, you are trying to be approved. You are trying to control how someone sees you, and that is where your power begins to disappear. Think about it. How many times have you walked away from a conversation feeling drained? Not because you were wrong, but because you gave too much of yourself to someone determined to misunderstand you. How many times have you explained your feelings to someone who used your honesty against you? How many times have you defended a boundary so much that it stopped sounding like a boundary and started sounding like a request for permission? This is the hidden cost of over-explaining. It does not just waste your words, it weakens your inner authority. Epictetus taught that if your peace depends on how others judge you, then you have become a servant to their opinions. Shaolin Master reminded himself to focus on his own character, not the noise around him, while Seneca warned that the desire to be seen, praised, and understood by everyone can pull you away from yourself. Being misunderstood hurts, especially when your intentions were good and you genuinely cared. But not every misunderstanding deserves your energy. Not every accusation deserves a defense. And not every person deserves access to the private courtroom of your mind. There comes a point where explaining yourself becomes self-abandonment. You sacrifice your peace to win an argument, your dignity to prove you are a good person, and your direction because you keep worrying about how others interpret your silence, growth, and decisions. The strongest version of you does not live on trial. Instead, that person understands the difference between healthy communication and emotional begging. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the moment you stop wasting energy in places that never valued it. This is not about becoming cold or uncaring. It is about knowing when your words are useful and when your actions speak louder. Your life does not need to be explained to everyone. Your standards, your consistency, and your self-respect will explain enough. Say it with calm. Say it with respect. Then stop. Not because you are weak and not because you have nothing left to say, but because you finally understand that your character is not built in other people's opinions. It is built in your actions, your consistency, your standards, and the quiet way you continue moving forward even when someone chooses not to understand you. The hidden cost of constantly explaining yourself is that it teaches you to live as if you are always on trial. But you are not on trial. Your peace does not need a lawyer. Your boundaries do not need a speech. Your life does not need to be constantly defended before people who are not responsible for building it. The moment you understand this, something inside you relaxes. You stop chasing understanding from every person. You stop handing your energy to every accusation. You stop confusing being misunderstood with being wrong. That is where real strength begins. Many people say, stay silent, as if silence automatically makes you strong. But that is not always true. Sometimes silence is wisdom, and sometimes it is fear. Sometimes silence is self-control, and sometimes it is avoidance wearing a calm face. Before you use silence as a shield, ask yourself one honest question. Where is this silence coming from? Are you silent because you are grounded or because you are scared? Are you silent because the situation does not deserve your energy or because you are afraid of confrontation? Real Stoic silence is not passive, it is not shrinking, it is not allowing people to walk over you while pretending to be peaceful. Real silence comes from self-respect. It comes from the quiet confidence that says, I do not need to react to everything. I do not need to prove myself to everyone. I do not need to spend my life convincing people to treat me with basic respect. That kind of silence carries weight. You can feel it in people who are not trying to win every room. They do not rush to correct every opinion or panic when someone misunderstands them. They listen, observe, and choose their words carefully. When they finally speak, they are not begging for approval. They are simply speaking the truth. That is the silence worth building. Not the silence of someone who has no power, but the silence of someone who refuses to waste power. When someone tries to provoke you, your first reaction may feel strong, but reacting is not always strength. Sometimes it only proves that another person still knows which buttons to press. True strength is restraint. Not because you are afraid, but because you are free. Anyone can explode in anger. Anyone can argue. The harder skill is remaining steady when your pride is challenged. A person with self-respect knows when to speak and when to remain silent. If someone crosses a boundary, silence alone may not be enough. You may need to speak clearly and directly. But direct does not mean dramatic, and strong does not mean aggressive. You can calmly say, "Do not speak to me like that." You can say, "That does not work for me." You can leave a conversation that has become disrespectful. The power comes after the boundary is spoken. You do not keep explaining. You do not keep negotiating. You do not keep trying to make someone comfortable with a limit they never wanted you to have. Your actions finish what your words began. That is true self-respect. That is true strength. And that is where silence becomes power. Self-respect does not always feel comfortable at first. Sometimes it feels like guilt. Sometimes it feels like anxiety. Sometimes it feels like you are being too harsh simply because you are used to overgiving. But do not confuse discomfort with wrongdoing. If you have spent years abandoning yourself to keep peace with others, choosing yourself will feel strange before it feels natural. Stay with it. Silence becomes power when it is backed by identity. When you know your values, when you know what you will no longer tolerate, and when you understand that losing someone's approval is not the same as losing your worth. Without that inner foundation, silence is only a pause. With it, silence becomes command. The next time you feel the urge to react, explain, defend, or prove yourself, slow down. Create a small space between the trigger and your response. Ask yourself, what would I do right now if I fully respected myself? Sometimes the answer will be to speak. Sometimes it will be to walk away. Sometimes it will be to say nothing at all and let the moment pass without giving it your energy. That is not weakness. That is discipline. And discipline is one of the quietest forms of power. One of the most painful lessons in life is realizing that some people do not misunderstand you by accident. They misunderstand you because it protects the story they want to believe. You can speak clearly, explain your intentions, share your feelings, and tell the truth, yet they will still twist your words. They may hear your boundary as rejection, your honesty as an attack, your silence as guilt, or your growth as arrogance. Not because you failed to communicate, but because they are not listening to understand. They are listening to defend their position. Think about how much energy you have spent trying to convince people that your heart was good. You explained yourself to people who had already decided you were selfish. You defended your distance to people who never cared how exhausted you were. You tried to prove your loyalty to those who only notice your absence after they could no longer benefit from your presence. You gave them patience, honesty, understanding, and kindness, yet they still chose the version of the story that made them feel right. It hurts, but it teaches an important lesson. Not every conflict can be solved with more words. Sometimes the problem is not communication. Sometimes it is a wall, and the more words you throw at that wall, the more exhausted you become. The Stoic mindset focuses on what is within your control. Did you act honestly? Did you speak fairly? Did you maintain your character? Did you respond with discipline? If the answer is yes, then the rest is no longer yours to carry. This does not mean you never explain yourself. Mature people communicate, clarify misunderstandings, admit mistakes, and speak with humility. But there is a difference between explaining yourself to create understanding and explaining yourself to gain approval from someone who has already chosen not to understand. A person who truly wants to understand you will not require you to bleed for clarity. They may ask questions. They may feel hurt. They may need time, but they will not turn every answer into a weapon. Someone committed to misunderstanding you will do the opposite. You answer one question and they attack another. You explain your intentions and they bring up your past. You apologize for your mistakes and they use your apology as proof that everything was your fault. At that point, you are no longer having a conversation. You are standing in a courtroom where they are the judge, the jury, and the witness. Do not live there. You were not born to spend your life begging unfair people for a fair interpretation. Some people will never see you clearly because doing so would force them to let go of the role they assigned to you. If they see your boundaries as healthy, they may have to admit they were taking too much. If they see your silence as peace, they may have to admit they were addicted to your reaction. If they see your distance as self-respect, they may have to admit they benefited from your lack of it. This is why wisdom means accepting that truth does not always need your panic to remain true. If you acted with integrity, let that be enough. If you corrected what needed correction, let that be enough. If you were honest, let that be enough. Stop reopening your peace because someone refuses to let go of a false narrative. Some people look at you through a dirty mirror covered with assumptions, jealousy, fear, pride, and unresolved pain. They are not seeing you. They are seeing a projection. And no amount of explaining can clean a mirror that someone else refuses to wipe. Real freedom begins when you stop needing every person to agree with your reality. Some people will misread your healing because they preferred your wounds. Some will resent your boundaries because they miss your availability. Some will criticize your silence because they can no longer control your reactions. Let them. Your responsibility is not to manage their discomfort. Your responsibility is to remain honest without becoming desperate, kind without tolerating disrespect, clear without becoming consumed by correction, and strong without becoming cruel. So remember this simple rule: explain once to people who deserve clarity. Do not explain endlessly to people who enjoy confusion. If someone sincerely wants to understand, speak with calm and care. If you made a mistake, own it honestly. But if someone keeps twisting your words and turning every explanation into another argument, stop feeding the cycle. Say less. Step back. Let your consistency become your defense. The strongest version of you does not need to win every interpretation. He knows that a misunderstood boundary is still a boundary, a misread silence is still peace, and a falsely judged life is still his life. Real power comes from living with such integrity that even when others misunderstand you, you never misunderstand yourself. People already know that respect matters. The real boundary is not giving a long speech about respect. The real boundary is calmly saying, I will continue this conversation when it becomes respectful, and then actually leaving if it does not. If someone constantly takes advantage of your availability without valuing your time, the boundary is not repeatedly explaining how busy you are. The boundary is simply refusing to rearrange your life every time they create chaos. If someone asks invasive questions about your private life, the boundary is not delivering a detailed explanation about why privacy matters to you. The boundary is saying, I would rather not discuss that, and allowing the silence afterward to exist. Many people struggle with boundaries because they fear the silence that follows. They set a limit and then immediately rush to fill the room with explanations. They worry that the other person will judge them, misunderstand them, become upset, withdraw affection, or accuse them of being selfish. But here is the truth. If a boundary is only safe when the other person approves of it, then it was never truly yours. A boundary is not a negotiation with someone else's comfort. It is an agreement with your own self-respect. And self-respect must be practiced when it feels uncomfortable, not only when people applaud it. Think about the person who always has access to you whenever they want. They call and you answer. They disappear and you wait. They disrespect you and you explain. They cross a line and you move the boundary farther away instead of holding it. Over time, they learn something important, not from your words, but from your behavior. They learn that your no can become a maybe if enough pressure is applied. They learn that your silence can be broken through guilt. They learn that your boundary is not a wall but a curtain. That realization may be painful, but it is necessary because people do not only listen to what you say, they watch what you allow. Your behavior must become your language. If you say you value peace, stop returning to conversations that destroy it. If you say you value honesty, stop giving access to people who only bring manipulation. If you say you value your time, stop giving it to people who treat it as disposable. If you say you love yourself, stop making excuses for people who repeatedly make you feel small. The world does not believe your standards because you announce them. It believes them when you live them. There is a quiet dignity in people who do not overexplain their boundaries. They are not trying to appear powerful. They simply know what is acceptable and what is not. They can be kind without becoming available for disrespect. They can be patient without becoming a place where others dump their disorder. They can love people without allowing love to become a doorway to self-abandonment. That is the balance. Boundaries without compassion become walls, but compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. You need both. You need enough compassion to speak without cruelty, enough clarity to say what you mean, enough discipline to stop once the truth has been spoken, and enough self-respect to allow people to experience the consequences of crossing clearly stated limits. This does not mean becoming harsh. It means becoming consistent. Consistency is what makes a boundary real. People may not like your boundaries. They may say you have changed. And perhaps you have. Maybe the version of you they preferred was the version that did not yet know how to protect himself. Maybe they missed a person who tolerated every slight, explained every hurt, and remained available even when exhausted. Let them miss that version. You are not required to resurrect your old self simply because someone benefited from it. When you stop over-explaining your boundaries, you quickly discover who respected you and who only respected your availability. People who genuinely value you may need time to adjust, but they will not punish you for having limits. People who used you, however, will often treat your limits as betrayal. Their reaction will reveal more than their words ever could. A boundary reveals people. It shows you who can love you without trying to own you, who can hear no without turning you into the enemy, who can respect your silence without demanding access to every thought in your mind, and who can accept your growth without trying to pull you back into a role that served them. Sometimes this will cost you relationships. But losing people who required you to abandon yourself is not failure. It is recovery. You were never meant to be endlessly available. You were never meant to explain every limit until everyone else felt comfortable. And you were never meant to sacrifice your peace simply to avoid being called selfish by people who were comfortable taking from you. And the next time you set a boundary, keep it simple. Say what is true. Say it calmly. Say it once, if once is enough. Then allow your actions to carry the message. If the conversation becomes disrespectful, leave. If the pattern continues, step back. If your access is abused, reduce it. If your peace is treated as unimportant, protect it without apology. That is not coldness, that is maturity. A boundary is not a speech. A boundary is a standard made visible through action. And when your boundaries begin to speak louder than your explanations, people may not always like it, but they will understand something important. You are no longer asking for permission to respect yourself. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not your time, not your attention, not your emotions, not your private thoughts, and not the deeper parts of your life that you are still learning how to protect. This may sound harsh at first, especially if you were taught that being a good person means always being open, available, and endlessly understanding. But openness without discernment is not kindness. It is exposure. And exposure to the wrong people can slowly become a form of self-destruction. Access is powerful. When someone has access to you, they can affect your mood, interrupt your focus, influence your decisions, and occupy your mind long after a conversation has ended. A careless comment can stay with you for hours. A manipulative message can disturb your entire day. A person who knows your insecurities can use them like keys, opening doors inside you that should have remained protected. That is why you must ask yourself an important question. Who have I allowed too close without earning it? Many people protect their money more carefully than they protect their attention. They would never hand a stranger their bank card, yet they freely hand over their emotional energy to anyone who asks. They would never give their house keys to someone unreliable, yet they share their thoughts, dreams, pain, and weaknesses with people who have never demonstrated the maturity to handle them with care. Then they wonder why they feel drained, distracted, and emotionally exhausted. The answer is simple. They have been living with open doors. They understood that the mind must be protected because it is the place where your life is built. Your choices begin there, your peace begins there, your discipline and identity begin there. If you allow everyone into that space, eventually you lose the ability to hear yourself clearly. Spend enough time around chaos and chaos starts to feel normal. Spend enough time around bitterness and bitterness begins to sound wise. Spend enough time around people who mock growth and eventually you may hide your ambition just to remain accepted. That is why access must be earned. Curiosity is not a credential. Just because someone asks a question does not mean they deserve an answer. Just because someone wants to know your plans does not mean they deserve the map. Some people ask because they care. Others ask because they want information. Learn the difference. There are people who listen to understand you, and there are people who collect pieces of you only to use them later. They remember your insecurities, not to protect them, but to use them when they feel powerless. They ask about your goals not to support them, but to compare themselves to you. They ask about your relationships not from concern, but because your private life gives them something to discuss. You do not owe these people your depth. You can be polite without being transparent. You can be kind without exposing every part of yourself. A private life is not a fake life. A protected life is not a lonely life. It simply means you have learned that not everyone who stands near you deserves entry into your inner world. Think of your life in layers. The outer layer is for general respect and kindness. This is where most people belong. The next layer is for those who have proven consistency, respect your boundaries, and treat your trust with care. The deepest layer is reserved for the rare few. The people who can see your weaknesses without exploiting them, hear your dreams without poisoning them, and hold your truth without turning it into gossip, judgment, or control. Many people suffer because they give deep access to shallow relationships. They trust intensity instead of consistency. They mistake attention for loyalty and confuse interest in their pain with the ability to honor it. Do not make that mistake. Attention is easy. Access should be earned through character. If someone cannot respect small boundaries, do not give them large access. If someone gossips about others, do not assume they will protect your privacy. If someone only appears when they need emotional support, do not treat them like a safe place. Patterns reveal character. Believe what they consistently show you. This does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone. Suspicion is fear. Discernment is wisdom. Suspicion says everyone will hurt me. Discernment says, I will watch who people are before I trust them with delicate parts of my life. A wise person does not close their heart. They govern it. They do not become cold. They become selective. They do not hate people. They simply refuse to let every person become an authority over their inner peace. When you begin protecting access, your mind becomes quieter. You stop explaining your life to people who do not need to know. You stop giving emotional discounts to people who only respect you when you are useful. You stop allowing casual opinions into sacred places. Your goals become clearer because fewer voices are interfering with them. Your peace becomes stronger because fewer people are allowed to disturb it. Your confidence becomes steadier because you are no longer placing your worth into unstable hands. Treat access like currency. Spend it intentionally. Do not give it to every demand, every curious question, every critic, every emotional emergency, or every person from your past who returns only when they sense you moving forward. Pause and ask yourself, has this person earned this level of access to me? If the answer is no, you do not need to be rude. You simply do not open the door that far. There is power in short answers. There is power in delayed responses. There is power in saying, I am not discussing that. There is power in keeping your plans private until they are strong enough to survive outside opinions. There is power in allowing some people to know less about you than they want to know. When you stop giving everyone access, you stop living like a public space. You become a protected place. Not protected by bitterness, but by self-respect. And the right people will not be offended by that. They will understand it. In fact, healthy people often admire it because they know that respect does not require unlimited access. But people who benefited from your lack of boundaries may feel threatened by your privacy. Let them adjust. Your peace is worth protecting. Your life is not a courtroom, and you are not required to spend your days defending your existence to people who have already decided how they want to see you. Your worth